The end of a series that we began a couple of weeks ago. And it was a series that we have been dealing with on the idea of forgiveness. Now forgiveness, I think we all agree, is an incredible concept, something that we hold to and want to see more in our life and in this world. Again, we don't have to look very far and to see just the brokenness of the world in which we live. And so as we look in our own country to what happened last Sunday in Quebec City, we see again not only the need for peace, but also the need for reconciliation. For when hurt begins to happen, when lives are taken, we begin to see just how significant it is for us to be able to extend forgiveness, for us to receive forgiveness. Now, perhaps that circumstance, that situation may seem very real. In other ways, it may seem farther removed. But I think for all of us, we understand the need for forgiveness in our own lives. And as I began this series about 4 weeks ago, it was the understanding of thinking there is probably brokenness in the midst of families. There is the brokenness in the midst of relationships that perhaps we once had and is no longer in the place we want it to be. There is brokenness perhaps in school or in workplace. There may be brokenness even when in this place, within people that are here this morning in terms of having challenges and difficulties. And so I think what we've wanted to do is not to avoid it, is not to ignore it, but to wrestle with it. To wrestle with it in the sense of understanding that this is not going to be easy, that at times it's going to be challenging, but that this is so necessary in the midst of all of life. And so if you've missed a Sunday, you can always jump onto our webpage and you can follow along. But a quick recap. The first step we looked at is in understanding how we have been forgiven by God. Because perhaps for some of us, the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. To forgive the mistakes or the wrongs that we have committed. And so we come back to this place of understanding how we have been forgiven by God. Of how Jesus, through his life, but then through his death, and then ultimately in his resurrection, we can understand this reality of being forgiven, of being made right with God. But then we understood that forgiveness extends beyond just our relationship with God, but that forgiveness then extends into our relationships with others. You see, this is at the core of the gospel. This is at the core of what Jesus desires from us, is that we forgive because we have been forgiven. It's so important for us to understand that everything we do as followers of Jesus is in response to what Jesus has already done for us. And so we don't live in such a way of thinking, will God love me? Rather, we live in such a way because we are loved by God. And so one of the real practical, tangible ways that we begin to extend the reality of Jesus in our life so that he doesn't simply become the guy we sing about or the guy we read about or even the guy we tell others about, but Jesus becomes real by the way in which we follow his teachings. We follow his ways, and that we extend forgiveness to others. And so we looked at some of the realities of what forgiveness is. It's basically you bearing the cost to restore the relationship. Forgiveness is not forgetting. We don't just suddenly have spiritual amnesia and we forget the past. Forgiveness is not saying that what you did didn't matter. It actually is saying it did matter, but in spite of the hurt, I am going to show forgiveness and grace. Forgiveness isn't always about simply saying, well, there's going to be no consequences or realities. You know, sometimes we see that play out in the day-to-day. But it does mean that we take the step of restoring relationships, of saying, I am giving up my right to hurt you back, of extending peace and grace. And then last week, we looked at some of just the realities of forgiveness, that forgiveness extends beyond just the moment we choose to forgive or not to forgive. That the way in which we forgive or the way in which we deal with the hurts in our life can actually become one of the greatest witness and testimonies to who Jesus is for us. And so when people look at your life and people see the way in which you live, do they see the Spirit at work in us choosing to forgive? It's a ripple effect. We also talked about how forgiveness doesn't only extend into the lives of others, but it has an impact upon us. That when we choose to forgive, and forgiveness is a choice, we give up the power of anger. We remove the shackles of bitterness so that it doesn't begin to extend into other encounters and other relationships with others. This is something that I continue to learn in my own life. The importance and the necessity of forgiveness. Because Jesus talks about the abundant life. And the abundant life is not just about understanding the hope that we have, that because of him, when we die, we have all of eternity. Jesus speaks about the abundant life in terms of the here and now, that yes, that is true about life after death, but ultimately, how do we live a life of abundance in the midst of brokenness? And I think forgiveness would be at the top of the list. Well, this morning we're going to kind of wrap up with just one final reality of forgiveness. I realize we have not touched on it all. I realize from the questions that have been coming in and the conversations that I've been having that this is real for all of us. But we're going to kind of wrap it up here this morning with coming to the Lord's table, the greatest reminder of forgiveness, of how we are forgiven and how we can then forgive others. But I want to kind of pause on this one last place this morning. And that is understanding that we've been forgiven by God, understanding how we need to forgive others. But final step, incredibly important step, and that is in understanding how we often need to ask forgiveness for the actions that we have taken. And this can be tough. This can be challenging. And so we're going to turn to a passage where Jesus is speaking in the book of Matthew. Now Matthew, interesting guy, before he followed Jesus, he was a tax collector. And I don't think anyone really loves paying taxes, but in Jesus' day, tax collectors were despised because not only would they be taking what the government needed, they would be taking a little bit extra as well. And so the Jewish people despised these tax collectors. And Matthew was one of them. And so Matthew would probably understand the need to go and to seek forgiveness from others, from having ripped off countless people time and time again. And so we're going to turn to Matthew's recording of Jesus' words because he probably locked right in on this and understood how practical it was. And so if you want to open your Bible or if you have your tablet or your phone, we're going to turn to Matthew chapter 5. If you don't have a Bible and you want to follow along, in the blue Bibles in front of you is on page number 4. We're also going to throw it up on the screens if you want to take a look there. But we're going to read these words of Jesus. And it's fairly early on in his ministry, and it comes at a very time where Jesus has kind of sat people down. It's often referred to as a Sermon on the Mount. And it's because of the physical location of where Jesus did the teaching. And Jesus is kind of really speaking about the reality, the handles we put upon what it means to follow him. And so being a follower of Jesus is not just a concept. It's not just an intellectual mind game that we have with ourselves. It is a hands-on, getting dirty with life and following in his ways. And so this is Jesus speaking. He says, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder.'" What Jesus is doing here is he's referring to the Old Testament. He's referring to the law of Moses. He says, so you have heard that it has been said, 'You should not murder,' and that whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." What Jesus is doing is he's just kind of setting it up. Right? Everyone's kind of in agreement. They're probably all nodding their heads saying, yeah, I got it. Murder's not a good thing. If you murder and kill someone, there's going to be judgment. We got you, Jesus. We're with you. But then Jesus says, "But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And that if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're on your way to court with him. or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you'll be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you'll never get out until you have paid the last penny. Jesus is saying a whole lot in this passage. We want to kind of unpack this a little bit for us. But I think the first place we begin is in understanding the context of what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is starting with murder. And there probably would not be many people there that would have disagreed with his assessment of murder. That if you murder, if you take a life, there is going to be consequences. There is going to be judgment. Then Jesus makes the leap and says, but I'm actually going to raise the bar. And this is what, is so challenging and frustrating about Jesus, is he starts at a place and think, well, I don't struggle with murder. I don't think. But then Jesus says, but I'm saying to you, if you have anger in your life, it's like murder. It's like murder before God. And that's when you kind of pull the horses back a little bit and say, whoa. Let's have a conversation about this. What are you talking about? Like murder, that's kind of obvious, but if I have anger, if I get upset, then that's the same in your eyes as if I just took a life? And what Jesus is doing, again, is just highlighting the importance of understanding the power that anger has in life, of how devastating anger can be. Perhaps you've never said this, but maybe you've heard it. When someone has done something so egregious towards you, you hear the comment, they're dead to me. They're dead to me. Right? This understanding that I'm just going to remove myself from them. There's such a sense of anger within. And this is the context that Jesus is speaking about, showing the significance of going beyond just the obvious of murder and dealing with anger. But then Jesus does a bit of a loop around. He does a bit of a switcheroo. Because you would think, knowing this passage, of saying, okay, Jesus is teaching about the importance of not getting angry, and now he's about to talk about forgiveness. And so Jesus is going to talk about how if I'm angry with someone else, then I need to forgive them for what they did. And notice Jesus doesn't do that. Notice Jesus then turns it around and actually says, if you have wronged someone, you need to go and get right with them. Why? Because I think that Jesus is highlighting the importance that because of your actions against another, you are actually putting them in a position to sin. By getting so angry and upset at you because what you have done, you're now causing an even greater challenge and problem. And so Jesus is urging us, telling us to get right with another. So that when we go and we seek forgiveness, it not only begins to restore that relationship, but it prevents potentially, the person from allowing anger to begin to grow up and well up within them. And so Jesus gets very practical. He says, if you're at the temple, if you're going to offer a sacrifice, which for us is important to understand, right? We don't offer animal sacrifice for a variety of reasons. But in Jesus' day, you would go to the temple and you'd offer a sacrifice as a way of atoning for your sin. It was an actual way that you would go and you would give of something to show that you wanted to get right with God. Now, sometimes the sacrifice would be given because you knew what you had done that was wrong. But then there'd be other times where actual sacrifices would be given because you would think, you know what, I've probably messed up a few times this year that I don't realize, and I'm just going to offer a sacrifice so that I can get right with God. And it's in that context that Jesus is speaking. And so Jesus is saying, if on your way to offer this sacrifice to cover off those sins, those broken relationships that you may not realize you've done or how deep they go, if on your way you realize that you have done something against another, leave it there. Leave it there. Like leave the goat, leave the bird, just leave it there and go and get right with the person and then come and offer my sacrifice. You see the consistency of Jesus? Jesus understands there's going to be religious traditions and ceremonies that we are going to go through, but ultimately at the heart of God is relationship. And one of the great walls and barriers that can prevent us from truly being right with God is we try to have this shiny facade as if everything is okay. And so I give my sacrifice, so I go to church, I serve in my church, I make sure I put something in those gold little shiny plates when they come by. I have the appearance of being good, yet I know I got some brokenness in relationships with others. And Jesus is saying, stop doing all those other things and get right with me first by getting right with others. You see, one of the dangers we can fall into is think, I have wronged someone else. I know that I have wronged someone else. And so I am going to ask God to forgive me for the wrong that I have committed, which is a good first step. But God is saying, don't stop there. Get right with the person. Actually go to them. Stop whatever you are doing. And so if we were going to take Jesus literally at his word, and I don't think I've ever done this before, but we're in a religious tradition right now. We're doing something that speaks to the significance of God in our life. So we have come, we've set apart this time to be together. Jesus is saying, listen, anything else that Joel is going to say to you is not as important as if you have something wrong with someone else by you getting up, going out those doors, and getting right with them right now. And so I'm giving permission to anyone right now. If you want to get up and you want to go, we will applaud you because you are practically putting into practice what Jesus wants you to do. I'm sure there's someone right now thinking, I was just about to go to the bathroom and now... But that's the reality. Jesus is saying, don't wait, go and get right. Because he continues on later on the verses of saying, because there's going to be consequences. He's saying if someone is about to take you to court, get right with them right then and now, or there could be even greater consequences. And unfortunately, we see this too often in our lives. That because we fail to get right with people, because we fail to go to them and ask them to forgive us, the consequences become even greater and greater and greater. I have sat with individuals, I have sat with families where there have been noticeable rifts. And I just try to share, I try to hear them share what the hurt has been. And it often goes back to a time when you look at the circumstance, everyone around the table is like, we don't know how it became as bad as it did. We kind of do. It's because we failed in humility to go and take the hard step of getting right with those that we have wronged. This is how important it is to Jesus. This is how important it is for us as well. And so I want to give you 4 words here this morning. That if this is a reality for you of needing to get right with someone, 4 words, 4 action steps that we can take. And I'm speaking from a place of experience, having had to do this many times in my life, and knowing that I'm going to have to continue to do this many more times in my life. But 4 words. Go, admit, ask, and thank. Go, admit, ask, and thank. Those are 4 real practical steps as to how we can get right with others. The first one is obvious, go. Just go. Jesus says, stop whatever else you are doing and make this a priority. Because if you don't, you're never going to get a sense of thinking, yes, this is something I so want to do. You have to go and deal with it. I could give you a number of examples from my own life. There was one occurrence last year where I was in a conversation with another woman in Malawi, and we were talking about something that was it was insignificant. It was just a conversation we were having, but what she was saying just wasn't right. And so I was just kind of correcting her about what she was saying. But have you ever been in a situation where you can be 100% right and yet your actions, you're still wrong? Yeah, that was me, right? And so afterwards, someone came up to me and says, you know what, Joel, you came on kind of strong with the person. And I was kind of all defensive, and I thought, no, but I was right. I was right. She was wrong. I was just correcting. You're a jerk, Joel. I thought, yeah, you're probably right. And so, and I felt a sense of needing to go to the person, not because I wanted to, but I felt that's what God was impressing upon me. And so I physically went to her. And my prayer in these circumstances is often the same thing. Jesus, give me the opening line. Give me the opening line for what I'm going to say. Because what tends to happen is we want to justify our behavior. We want to tell ourselves it's really not that big of a deal. You know, they did this. You know, why do I have to go? And Jesus says, go and get right. Second step is admit. Actually own what you have done. Don't give like a vanilla apology where you kind of beat around the bush and you don't really talk about it. Don't give the apology whereby you kind of say, you know, I'm really sorry you are hurt by this. You know, no. Because you know what's only worse than no apology? It's a bad apology, right? And so think of in your own life when people have given you bad apologies, how does that make you feel? Worse. You think you're not even owning this. And so go and admit, own what you've done. As specifically as you can. Third one, and this is important, ask. Ask that they will forgive you. Because then you're actually asking something from them. You're representing how important this is to you. And they're going to have an opportunity to respond. You see, if we go, if we admit, we ask, then it's now on them. The Apostle Paul, another great follower of Jesus, but before he followed Jesus, he did some awful things to Christians. He too would have understood the importance of going and asking forgiveness from others. And he says this incredible line in Romans 12, verse 18. He says, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everybody. What's the Apostle Paul saying? He's saying, listen, this is a two-way street. You may go, you may admit, you may ask, but then it's up to them, the person you have wronged, to respond. And you can't own that. You can't own it. But you need to ask it. And then the fourth one, thank. Hopefully, by the grace of God, all goes well, and they extend forgiveness. Thank them for it. It speaks to the depth and the significance of it. And so if there's things going on in your life, it can be small things. Don't allow them to become big things. They could be big things. Don't allow them to become bigger things. Jesus says, stop whatever else you are doing. Stop going to church on a Sunday morning if you think that you need to get right with someone else. Stop reading your Bible. Stop praying. If the name comes to mind, stop everything else that you are doing and go and get right with them. Because there's so much at stake. There's so much at stake. You see, how we live, how we forgive is a true reflection of how active Jesus is in our life. Not only in how we forgive others, but in our willingness to ask to be forgiven. Because if people hear that you're followers of Jesus, I'm not making a claim that I'm living a perfect life. I know that I'm going to mess up. I know that I'm going to make mistakes. And the question isn't if I'm going to make mistakes, but how I'm going to respond when I do. And Jesus says, will you be humble enough to go, to admit, to ask, and then to thank. And begin to see what God can do in those circumstances, in those situations. We're going to turn our attention back to Jesus. Because this is one of the traditions that Christians have followed for over 2,000 years. We call it a number of things. We call it communion, we call it Eucharist, we call it the Lord's table. It signifies the importance of Jesus' forgiveness in our life. So we take elements of bread and of the cup, we set them apart from common use so that they may become significant to us, so that we may experience the grace of God in our lives. And we're going to do that here this morning. I want to encourage you this morning that if God is speaking into your life about a specific person or a specific situation, whether someone you need to forgive, or perhaps someone you need to go to be forgiven by, make that your prayer this morning. Or perhaps it's you needing to experience God's forgiveness in your life. You see, Jesus meets us wherever we are, but he doesn't leave us there. He wants us to grow in grace and mercy, and the first step is in us admitting that we need him. And so wherever you are in your walk, whether you're someone who's been following Jesus for a long time, or perhaps this Jesus stuff is entirely new, here's an opportunity and an invitation to say, Jesus, I want you to be a part of my life. And so as we prepare to come to the table, let us pray together.